A wealthy man with everything money could buy believed his world was perfect, until one night he heard muffled sobs coming from his young daughter's bedroom. Shocked, he rushed toward the sound, only to find his housemaid kneeling beside the little girl, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, nothing made sense. Why was the maid crying? What was she hiding? And why did his daughter cling to her as if her life depended on it? What he discovered next would not only shatter his pride, but forever change the way he saw love, loyalty, and humanity. Victor Hayes was a man who lived in a world built on perfection, or at least, that's what he wanted everyone to believe. From the grand chandelier in his marble-floored living room to the imported leather seats in his luxury car, everything about him screamed control, wealth, and order. His neighbors admired him, business partners respected him, and newspapers occasionally praised him as the self-made millionaire with a golden touch. But beneath all that glittering success, there was something missing, something he refused to acknowledge, the silence that filled his mansion every night. Victor had lost his wife years ago, and though he never admitted it, the hollow ache of her absence clung to him like a shadow. His only true source of light was his young daughter, Emily. She was the reason he worked late nights, the reason he pushed harder, and the only reason his enormous home felt remotely alive. Yet, as Emily grew, Victor noticed how she quietly withdrew from the glossy, polished world he had built. She laughed less, asked fewer questions, and more often than not, she clung to the company of their maid, a black woman named Rosa. Rosa was different from anyone else in Victor's house. She didn't blend in with the silence. She disrupted. She filled the air with lullabies, soft hums, and the scent of freshly baked bread. For Emily, she was more than just a caretaker. She was warmth, love, and safety. But for Victor, Rosa was someone he hardly noticed. She was part of the, background, someone hired to maintain order in his home. He paid her well, ensured she had a roof, and thought that was enough. That belief shattered one fateful evening. It had been a long day for Victor, filled with meetings and negotiations. By the time he returned home, the mansion was bathed in silence. He loosened his tie, ready for his usual routine of pouring a glass of whiskey and reviewing numbers. But then he heard it, the faint sound of crying. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it cut through the stillness like a knife. Confused, Victor followed the sound down the hall toward Emily's room. What he saw made his chest tighten. Rosa was sitting on the edge of Emily's bed, holding the little girl close as if shielding her from some unseen pain. Tears streamed down Rosa's cheeks, silent but heavy, dripping onto the soft blanket. Emily's small hand gripped hers tightly, her face pressed into Rosa's shoulder. Victor froze at the doorway, unable to process what was happening. Why was his daughter seeking comfort in Rosa instead of him? And more importantly, what could possibly break Rosa's strength, the very woman who had always seemed unshakable? That night marked the beginning of a story Victor never expected to live. A story that would expose hidden struggles, test his pride, and force him to confront the humanity he had long overlooked. For hours after that moment at Emily's door, Victor couldn't sleep. He poured himself glass after glass of whiskey, trying to quiet the questions tearing through his mind. Why was Rosa crying? What had Emily seen or heard that made her cling to Rosa instead of her own father? He wanted to believe it was nothing, that maybe it was simply exhaustion, maybe grief from her own past resurfacing. But something about those silent tears unsettled him in a way he couldn't shake. The following morning, Victor tried to act normal. He greeted Emily with a rare kiss on the forehead, handed her a neatly packed lunchbox, and insisted on driving her to school. But Emily's eyes, usually so bright when he gave her extra attention, remained distant. Her smile was thin, fragile. When she whispered goodbye, her glance strayed to Rosa, who stood at the door, her face calm, but her eyes still carrying that quiet heaviness from the night before. Victor noticed it then, the way his daughter's gaze sought Rosa's approval before stepping into the car. It stung. It felt like he was an outsider in his own home, a stranger in the relationship that mattered most to him. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Victor decided he couldn't ignore it any longer. He approached Rosa in the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner. "Emily seems different," he muttered, unsure how to begin. Rosa paused, her hand still on the cutting board, but she didn't answer. When she finally lifted her gaze, it wasn't with the softness Victor expected. It was with restraint, the kind born from years of swallowing words. "She's a child, Mr. Hayes," Rosa said softly. "Children feel things before they understand them. She feels your distance." The words hit harder than Victor anticipated. Distance. He wanted to argue, to remind Rosa how much he worked, how everything he did was for Emily's future. But as he looked at Rosa, at the lines of fatigue around her eyes, at the weight she carried silently, he realized she was speaking a truth he didn't want to hear. But Rosa's tears from that night were still unanswered. And the more Victor thought about them, the more restless he grew. A few days later, the truth revealed itself in a way that both shocked and enraged him. Victor had come home earlier than usual, stepping quietly into the house. He moved down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. That's when he heard voices from the garden, Emily's sweet laughter and Rosa's soothing tone. Curious, he approached the open patio door. What he overheard stopped him cold. Emily was asking Rosa why she was sad. Rosa hesitated before answering, her voice trembling. "Because, sweetheart, some people don't see me as a person. They see me as less important, less worthy because of my skin." Victor felt his chest tighten. Rosa continued, her tone careful but unflinching. "Today at the market, a woman told me I should shop in another neighborhood, that I didn't belong there. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and no one stopped her. No one defended me, they just looked away." Emily gasped softly, her innocence shattered by the ugliness of the world. "But you belong with us," she whispered. Victor gripped the doorframe, fury coursing through him. He thought of all the business meetings where subtle jokes had been made, all the polite smiles that hid prejudice, all the moments he had dismissed as not his concern. But now it was different. This was his home. His daughter's safe haven had been pierced by the cruelty Rosa endured every day. For the first time, Victor truly saw Rosa, not as background, not as an employee, but as a woman carrying battles, in silence while raising his daughter with more love than he had managed to give. And he realized with a jolt that by remaining silent all these years, he had been complicit in the very injustice that made her cry. What Victor did next would not only change Rosa's life but also determine the kind of father he would become. That night Victor lay awake staring at the ceiling. The words Rosa had spoken to Emily replayed over and over, slicing through his pride. "They don't see me as a person." It was unbearable to think that someone under his roof, someone who raised his child with tenderness, was being diminished daily, and he had done nothing. By morning, his restless mind had become determination. He went into the office, but for the first time in years his focus wasn't on quarterly reports or investor calls. It was on Rosa, on Emily, on the silent bond between them that revealed his absence as a father. But change didn't wait politely. It came crashing into his life that very afternoon. Victor had agreed to take Emily to a school fundraiser. Rosa came along to help with preparations, carrying snacks and supplies into the community hall. Everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. It happened so quickly, so sharply that Victor almost couldn't believe it was real. A group of parents stood near the entrance, whispering. One of the mothers, dressed in a designer suit, approached, with a tight smile. "Mr. Hayes," she said sweetly, "we're so glad to see you here, but may I suggest that your help," her eyes flicked to Rosa, "might wait outside until the event is over?" The words, though wrapped in politeness, dripped with venom. Victor froze. Emily clutched Rosa's hand, confusion clouding her face. Rosa, however, didn't flinch. She gave a small, practiced smile, the kind forged from years of surviving humiliation, and turned as if ready to step away quietly to protect Emily from a scene. But something inside Victor broke. He thought of his daughter, watching this unfold. He thought of Rosa's tears, the market incident, the laughter that had dimmed in his own home. And suddenly he saw everything clearly. The years of silence, the comfortable excuses, the cowardice of people like him who looked away. Not this time. Victor's voice, usually controlled and calculated, thundered through the hall. She doesn't wait outside. She belongs here. The room went silent. Parents turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. Rosa froze, staring at him in shock. Emily's grip tightened on her hand, as if to say she already knew whose side she was on. The woman in the designer suit stiffened. "Mr. Hayes, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Victor cut in. His tone was sharp, his face set like steel. "I understand that this woman has raised my daughter with more love and care than anyone in this room could imagine. I understand that she has faced cruelty and judgment you will never know, yet she stands here with dignity. And I understand that if this is the kind of community you want for your children, one that teaches them exclusion and hate, then it's not a community I want for mine." Gasps rippled through the hall. Some parents looked away embarrassed. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to challenge their own prejudices. But a few, a small few, nodded quietly, as though Victor had spoken a truth they too had buried out of fear. Emily's eyes shone with pride. Rosa's lips parted, her breath shaky, as if she were holding back a storm of emotions. The woman muttered something under her breath and walked away, her authority crumbling. Victor stepped closer to Rosa, lowering his voice so only she and Emily could hear. "No more silence. Not in this house. Not in this family." Rosa's eyes welled with tears, but this time, they weren't from humiliation. They were from the shock of finally being seen. From that moment, everything shifted. Victor knew the fight wasn't over. There would be whispers, consequences, uncomfortable dinners with colleagues who preferred the status quo. But he also knew that silence had cost too much already. If Emily was to grow up in a world that honored dignity, then it had to start with him, choosing courage over comfort, truth over convenience. The community event continued, but for Victor, Rosa, and Emily, it had already become something far greater, a turning point, a line drawn in the sand. And as he stood there, his daughter's small hand in Rosa's, Victor realized this was no longer about being a wealthy father or a respected businessman. It was about being human, choosing to stand against the tide, even when the tide was all you had ever known. The battle had begun. The days following the school fundraiser were unlike anything Victor had ever experienced. News of his public defense of Rosa spread quickly through the small community, carried in whispers, text messages, and social media posts. Some parents were quietly supportive, telling him they admired his courage. Others, however, treated him with a chilling silence, their conversations cutting off the moment he entered a room. His phone buzzed with colleagues warning him that aligning too loudly with certain issues might hurt his business standing. Victor had always thrived in control, steering boardrooms and bending negotiations to his will. But here, in the wake of his choice, he felt something foreign: vulnerability. He realized that standing against racism wasn't about a single confrontation. It was about living with the consequences of truth, day after day. And yet, in his own home, a quiet transformation bloomed. For the first time in years, laughter returned. Emily ran to Rosa after school, eager to share every detail of her day, no longer afraid to call her family in public or private. Rosa's shoulders seemed lighter, her smile more genuine, though her eyes still carried the memory of wounds too deep to vanish overnight, and Victor himself felt a strange mixture of relief and reckoning. One evening, as he sat in his study, Victor found himself sifting through Rosa's file, the paperwork he had signed years ago without thought, the standard employment forms that reduced her existence to a few sterile lines. Age, address, salary. No space for the weight of sacrifice, the cost of dignity, or the resilience it took to keep going in a world stacked against her. He closed the folder, ashamed of how little he had truly seen until now. But Rosa had seen everything. She saw the subtle changes. Victor now joining Emily at the dinner table instead of hiding behind his work. She noticed when he began correcting friends or colleagues who made thoughtless remarks, even when it earned him icy stares. She saw a man learning, stumbling at times, but choosing to keep moving forward. Still, the world outside did not soften easily. One Saturday, Rosa and Emily went shopping together. Victor insisted on joining, refusing to let Rosa navigate the sting of public stairs alone. When a store clerk trailed Rosa suspiciously down the aisles, Victor didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the manager, his voice calm but firm. "If this is how you treat loyal customers, you've lost one today." He took Emily and Rosa's hands, leaving the store without another word. Emily's small voice broke the silence as they walked back to the car. "Daddy, why are people so mean to Rosa?" Victor paused, looking down at his daughter. He realized this was the moment, perhaps the most important lesson he would ever teach her. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "people choose to see only the color of someone's skin instead of the person standing in front of them. And when that happens, we have two choices: stay quiet and let it continue, or stand up and say it's wrong." Emily nodded slowly, her young mind already holding more wisdom than many adults. She turned to Rosa, squeezing her hand tightly, as if to promise that she would never let the world's cruelty change how she saw her. That night, Rosa wept again, but not from humiliation. These were tears of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Weeks turned into months. Rosa's dignity was no longer something hidden in the corners of the household. It became part of its foundation. Victor gave her opportunities she had been denied elsewhere, supporting her enrollment in evening classes, encouraging her to pursue dreams long postponed by the grind of survival. He knew money could never erase the scars of racism, but he also knew that empowering her to claim her own future was a start. Emily, meanwhile, grew into a girl unafraid to challenge injustice. When classmates whispered cruel things, she defended Rosa with the same fire she had seen in her father that night at the fundraiser. And in those moments, Victor realized his stand had shaped not just one woman's life, but his daughter's character too. But perhaps the greatest transformation was within Victor himself. For so long he had believed wealth insulated him from the world's ugliness. He had convinced himself that silence was neutrality, not complicity. But Rosa's tears, Emily's questions, and his own awakening taught him otherwise. Silence was a weapon too, one that cut just as deep as hatred. And so, Victor chose a different path. He began speaking publicly, not just at social events, but on larger platforms, using his influence to challenge systemic discrimination in workplaces and schools. Some scoffed, calling it virtue signaling. Others accused him of overstepping. But Victor no longer cared, because now, when he looked at Rosa, he saw not an employee, but a person whose resilience had forced him to open his eyes. And when he looked at Emily, he saw a future worth fighting for, a world where dignity wasn't negotiable and humanity wasn't conditional. One evening, months later, Rosa sat on the porch with Emily curled up beside her. Victor watched from the doorway as Rosa told stories of her childhood, her laughter filling the night air. He realized then that what had begun as shame and confrontation had grown into something stronger, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love. The world outside remained imperfect. Racism still lurked in glances, words, and structures too deep to erase overnight. But in this home, at least, justice had begun to take root, and for Victor, that was enough to keep fighting. This isn't just a story about a maid, a wealthy father, and a little girl. It's about the moments when silence becomes betrayal, and the courage it takes to finally speak. It's about what we choose to pass on to the next generation: comfort or conviction. So ask yourself, When you witness injustice, will you look away, or will you stand?